On the line with us is a writer for the New York Times, Wajahat Ali. If I'm pronouncing that right, sir?
That was very impressive. You deserve a Kit Kat for saying it properly.
Okay, thank you. And the website is Wajahat Ali, Wajahatali. Excuse me, that's the Twitter handle, at Wajahat Ali. And, of course, you can read his article, which is just absolutely brilliant. It's titled "The Roots of the Christchurch Massacre" over at the New York Times. It was published last Friday, I believe. Wajahat, welcome. First of all, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us today. I caught a little bit of you on TV this morning and thought this guy really has clarified in his mind and through his work and research exactly what's going on here. You know, from Christchurch, New Zealand to the United States. Can you give us a summary of your understanding of what's actually going on?
Sure, and thanks for having me on your show. It's a globalized ideology of hate, which anchors these disparate white power and white nationalist movements. The ideology is white supremacy. The ideology states that white people, or white civilization, whatever that means, is inherently superior to all other inferior civilizations and individuals and have to remain on top. One of their main fears, Tom, is something called the Great Replacement Theory. And if you're paying attention, that was the name of the manifesto written by the man who killed 50 people in New Zealand, the domestic terrorist. They called it the Great Replacement. Right. Another word for the Great Replacement is white genocide. What this says is that there's a global conspiracy headed by, quote-unquote, the Jews, who are the head and brains of the cabal. And what they're trying to do is use their wealth and money to bring in foreigners, invaders, immigrants, black people, Muslims, to overtake and weaken the white man so that the white man will be subordinated. Now, if you're paying attention and read the manifesto of the domestic terrorist in New Zealand, he said he wanted to punish the invaders, he used the word several times, and take revenge against who? The Muslims. If that is familiar to you, it's because in October, Robert Bowers walked into a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life, and shot and killed 11 people. He said that he wanted to punish the invaders, those individuals helping bring in refugees, and he was going to get them before they got us. Specifically, on the right-wing social media site Gab, he retweeted a post that said we have to punish the evil, filthy Jews for bringing in the evil, filthy Muslims. Now, how is Trump connected? Trump might not be a white supremacist, Tom, but he has no problem promoting white supremacist conspiracy theories, just like the one I mentioned. In October, midterm elections, you can't gaslight us. It just happened. He tripled down on one talking point and one talking point only. What was that?
I don't recall.
The caravan.
Oh, yeah.
The caravan. This was when he was sitting on top of a pretty robust economy. There was job growth, but him and Fox News went all in that there is an invasion, he used the word multiple times, a caravan of rapists and criminals and Middle Eastern suspects and Mexicans that are invading America. What he also tweeted out was the George Soros conspiracy theory. George Soros is a Jewish Hungarian-American billionaire that is allegedly funding the caravan. That was promoted by Republican leadership. That is a conspiracy theory that is part and parcel of the Great Replacement that has emerged directly from white supremacist infrastructure and used in Europe. And if you look at the terrorist's manifesto, he refers to Donald Trump. What does he say? Trump is a renewed symbol of white pride, and he shares a common purpose. Why would a domestic terrorist who walks into a mosque and kills 50 people share a common purpose with Donald Trump? And there's way more examples, but that's just a taste.
Yeah. So, wow. Meanwhile, we've got, Andrew Breitbart saying that his big awakening, his conversion, was when he discovered cultural Marxism, which has now become a thing on the right. And it apparently tracks back to a small group of Jewish people who emigrated here from Nazi Germany in the late 1930s. And or at least, from what I've been able to determine. And then you've got the guys in Charlottesville chanting, you will not replace us, Jews will not replace us.
That's exactly it. The Jews will not replace us. There you go. It's white supremacists, KKK, and the alt-right who took their tiki torches to Charlottesville, and that's what they were chanting. Now, if you were paying attention, does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
what the New Zealand shooter was saying and the synagogue shooter was saying.
Well, and you go back to Anders Breivik, the mass murderer in Norway who killed 70+ people, children, in fact, of children of liberals, because it was a liberal organization that sponsored the summer camp, specifically because he was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, because he said that the liberals in Norway were in favor of bringing refugees into the country.
Yeah, and the shooter in New Zealand was inspired in part by Anders Breivik, who in 2011 left behind a 1,500-page manifesto explaining in detail why he shot and killed 69 mostly teenagers and left a bomb in a federal building, killing 77 people. He said that he wanted to punish Europe for being pro-immigrant, for being pro-diversity, and for being pro-Muslim. And he wanted to warn Europe.
Right.
Anders Breivik also, and I haven't been able to share this on media channels in the last 3 days, but hopefully I can, if you give me 20 seconds.
Sure.
Anders Breivik left behind that 1,500-page manifesto. He cites, Thomas, in that 1,500-page manifesto, the writings of American Islamophobes. In fact, Mark Sageman, a counterterrorism expert, said that those American Islamophobes, who I'll name in a second, can't be blamed for his actions, but Breivik and them emerged from the same ideological infrastructure. I wrote about all of this in 2011 in an investigative report I did called Fear Incorporated, The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America, trying to understand where these conspiracy theories like Sharia is a threat to America. That should sound familiar for anyone who's been paying attention to what's happening to Judge Pirro. Where did this come from, right? Mm-hmm. And what we traced was it went from the swamp and the right wing to the mainstream discourse, specifically through elected officials, think tanks, some funders, grassroots groups, and mainstream media personalities. So something that was fringe 10 years ago was literally uttered by Judge Pirro last week on her show on Fox News to defame Ilhan Omar as being a potential fifth column, a non, if you will, loyal American based on the fact that she's Muslim and wears hijab. Right. And Breivik inspired this New Zealand shooter. Breivik also inspired this Coast Guard who just a couple of weeks ago, Christopher Hassan, we forgot about it because it's Trump, so like there's a new chaos every day. But there was a domestic terrorist who was caught, who was stockpiling weapons, inspired by Breivik, who wanted to kill as many Muslims and people as possible, and he said he wanted to establish a white state. The question we have is, why is Donald Trump so impotent and pathetic in confronting white supremacists? But if it was a Muslim suspect, he tweets tough. Yeah, and that's a question.
He'd be going nuts on this stuff. The question for me, Wajahat.
Call me Waj.
Ali. Yeah. Okay, Waj. The question for me is, what do we do about this? I mean, we've got this simple reality of the browning of America and, frankly, Europe and the rest of the world. And you've got some white people who are, paranoid about that. You've got others, I would say the majority, who are using that to exploit other white people, to crank up fear, basically a racialized fear. This is not anything new. I mean, Richard Nixon's war on drugs was meta to this. It was about black people. The reefer madness of the 1920s was meta to this, about Hispanics. We've seen this over and over and over. The Republicans for years used this. Black people want to take your jobs, et cetera. How do we speak to these frightened white people who think that somehow there being a smaller percentage of the population of the United States represents a personal threat to them?
That's a very good question. I wrote about this in the summer. It's called How to De-Radicalize White People for the New York Review of Books. And you set it up really well, is that there's this perceived racial anxiety. That was the main, not the only, but the main motivator for Trump voters, according to every single study that's been done in the past 3 years. It's not economic anxiety, it's racial anxiety. Right. And it's politicians, like you said, who play upon these cultural wars and racial anxieties to pit the white people, the mainstream, against everyone else. Invasion, horde, Mexicans are rapists and criminals, Muslim ban. I mean, look, it's right in front of us. Trump's been doing it. The dog whistles are blowhorns, right, the last 3 years. Yep. And so what we're witnessing around the world is what I call the death rattle of white supremacy, which has transformed into a death march. I did not say white people, I said white supremacy. It's an ideology and a structural superiority that has been put in place in Europe and America since its foundation. And because there are more people of color, and also one other aspect that people never mention, and they should, women. misogyny is critical in the white supremacist movement. They are deeply, deeply threatened by empowered women.
This is highly hierarchical and patriarchal.
Highly. And so the alt-right, for example, the way they recruit a lot of the alt-right guys are these straight white guys, and they say that the Jews are promoting narratives in Hollywood that are empowering women, and these women are emasculating you. And so what we're witnessing is this feeling of emasculation and weakness, a feeling where they're losing validation and power, which is why the white supremacy narrative is so powerful, just like the ISIS narrative. It goes to angry, dislocated men and women who feel unmoored, and they find a community, a sense of belonging, of validation in this community, which they find usually online, and it gives them a sense of purpose. And what I always like to remind people is they think they're the heroes, Tom. That's a key thing. They think they're the protagonists of a global narrative.
No, but
they
we're still diagnosing the
Paul
problem. I mean, how do we speak to them?
So how we speak to them is the following. You need a top-down approach. First and foremost, you need the President of the United States of America to actually confront it as a problem and call it what it is, domestic terrorism. It's the number one act of domestic terror threat in America, according to the FBI. Attack it the way he attacks John McCain in the press. I mean that sincerely. So A, top-down leadership. You have to call it for what it is, domestic terrorism. B, we have laws on the book that can be enforced to go after them with teeth. Some people say we need more laws. For example, those laws that really attack terrorism are only for those entities that are foreign, such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So give law enforcement the teeth to prosecute it. Number 3, top-down, bottom-up education. What's their ideology? How do they operate? How do they mobilize? Sure, so education, top-down, to really identify the markers.
I mean, like build this into our schools.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because, when I talk to experts who are helping in de-radicalization, they said that a lot of these young men, people miss the signs. People miss it.
Do you know how long, though, we have been fighting this? I mean, when my wife and I were kids, and I mean, literally, when we were in high school, this was in the 1960s, and I was in Lansing, she was in East Lansing, Michigan. In my schools, we did not have any kind of education about people of color. There was nothing. In her school in East Lansing, it's a college town, they had 2 years of black studies. And she had to read all these, all this stuff, and that I grew up being largely ignorant of, and those programs that started in the 60s. I mean, they were coming out of some of the turmoil of the 60s. Although, frankly, this would have been in the mid. This would have been like 63 to 66. That those are all gone to a large extent, as far as I can tell. And that was just a very modest effort to acquaint, middle-class white people with the struggles of people of color in the United States, both the slavery and the Native American genocide.
Exactly, and you kind of mentioned in your last segment that I was listening to, right? These propagandas that we have, this meritocracy, that if you just pull yourself up from the bootstrap in America, like this equal country where anyone can make it, but kind of being invisible to the hidden hand, the power structures, the privileges, the luck, right? And so when you see President Obama be the president, now you see people say, oh, well, let's just, wash our hands of it. We live in a post-racial society. Racism, that's in the past. Move on. And then the rest of us like, whoa, wait a second. Nope. If anything, it revealed the fissures because the hate groups in America that exploded, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, are the past 10 years. Post-election of Barack Hussein Obama. And you have to think about it based on what I was talking about in the last segment. What could be more terrifying than a black man, son of a Kenyan Muslim, ascending to the highest office in the land? What could be more triggering, Tom, to people who feel, quote-unquote, racial anxiety? And so this type of education has to go both ways, an empowering education about all the narratives of Americans who got left out. That's us, people of color, including some of the signs about these men who are being radicalized online. And finally, two last things. Online. Social media has a duty and responsibility because this ideological infrastructure thrives online. They recruit online, they radicalize, they do propaganda, and they do targeting. And ISIS and white power movements are always 2 steps ahead. Yes, they're minor in number, but they're highly organized and passionate. And so social media now has to find the needle in the haystack and shrink the haystack. We have to deplatform people. I'll give you one quick example where deplatforming actually works, guys. I just read a tweet right before I got on this phone that Milo Yiannopoulos who was given a mainstream social media platform, remember him 2 years ago,
Yep.
is now desperately willing to go have lunch or dinner with anyone if you pay him because he's $2 million in debt. Both him and Alex Jones have been deplatformed.
Yeah.
So social media has a role in this to play, and Donald Trump took away funding. This is the final thing I'll say. He took away funding from from white supremacist groups, former white supremacists who were de-radicalizing.
And Wajahat, we're going to have about 3 minutes here until we have.
I've been talking too much.
No, it's great. Until we hit this hard break at the bottom of the hour, we've been talking about how from top down the president should be condemning this. We need to educate people, going back to like the diversity studies that we had back in the 60s, frankly, things like this, and deplatforming these people, a comprehensive thing. But back to my original question: if what's really going on here at some level, and I have seen this, throughout my life, right? If what's going on is that white men are feeling like their privilege that they grew up assuming would always be there, without even thinking of it in those terms, right? But if the white men are saying, wait a minute, our privilege is being taken away from us. And I saw this in the 1970s with the women's movement. I remember the University of Michigan, just down the street from us, there was this big, lawsuit about reverse discrimination that just inflamed the right. And Pat Buchanan was out, in Michigan, stomping all over Michigan, screaming about this. Women are taking the positions of white men. Now black people are taking the positions of white men, et cetera. That as long as white people are actually seeing their privilege be diminished, how do we speak to them about that in a way that doesn't make them crazy? How do you say, yes, your white privilege may be being diminished because we're bringing everybody else up to your level? And, that's going to mean that, some white people are not going to have quite as much privilege as they used to have, but it's the right thing. I mean, it doesn't seem like that's going to work with the Proud Boys.
It's going to be difficult.
And you got 1 minute.
You're not going to win them all. There's going to be some people who will be radicalized. They'll never evolve and change, just like those people who never evolved when schools were desegregated. But we need enough, let me just be tongue-in-cheek, moderate whites to step up and get their people and educate them and inform them and say exactly what you said, that this is better for all of our kids. It will create a just, equal society, because in the absence of this, there will be nothing but warfare and division. And that's, by the way, exactly what ISIS and white supremacists want.